Hey, Doc, thank you so much for coming on to the Stop Chasing Pain podcast. I am really excited to have you on today.
Oh, thank you, Doc. It's lovely to be with you. I'm very excited to talk to you. Love what you do.
Thank you very much. Well, ditto for you as well. We were talking a little bit before we came on about how we both love brains.
Yes, for sure. I
But in a healthy way.
I have a couple around the room here, but they're actually in my studio, but they're not real brains. They're models, but I have a few.
Well, I mean, we're gonna try to talk for about 45 minutes, something like that, to an hour about the brain, one of the most miraculous things in the universe. So we'll
Absolutely.
get what we can in there. And we're definitely going to talk about your new book that's coming out. Do you want to hold it up for people that are
Absolutely,
watching?
yeah. Cleaning up your mental mess. So it's helping. What we all need to do that. We're human. We have mental messes. We need to clean it up. And I've included some scientific studies in here, my clinical case studies, clinical research. Very simple. And then the second half of the book's how to do it. How do you clean up your mental mess using the Neurocycle? So nice and simple.
I love that because, neuroscience is absolutely fascinating. I mean, you can go down so many rabbit holes with that. But what I found is it's a lot of information. Then people are like, but what do I do with it?
Exactly. I agree with you. And so it's so important that we make it accessible. And that's something that I've tried my whole life, to my whole working career, which is going on almost 4 decades now, where I've been doing clinical research. I've practiced clinically for 25 years. I've written plenty of books. This is number 19. And in all of it, our objective has been to try and take this complex science, which we need because you don't want to just do stuff without having good evidence base, and make it accessible. And my field of expertise has been to study mind, which is a mind-brain connection. But really, what is the difference, and can you manage it? And the answer is yes.
Yeah, well, there's so much I'd like to unpack from that. And before we start talking about mind-brain, which I think is really important, I'm curious because writing 19 books, first of all, bravo. That means you've got a really sharp mind and you know how to share it. But
Thank you.
I'm just curious of the evolution of the 19 years, like of now compared to the beginning of how you see neuroscience or the brain. I mean,
actually,
what's changed for you?
That's a great question, because I actually began my journey almost 38 years ago. And in the 80s, the brain wasn't seen as something that could change. And that was honestly, my lecturers would say that the brain can't change. So if someone's had a traumatic brain injury or something like that, well, you just teach them to compensate, was the going philosophy of the day. Neuroplasticity was only really started to be accepted towards the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, and then the mid 90s with, as you know, with the advent of technology. So I remember sitting in one of my neuroscience lectures, because I did a degree that was a combination of medicine and neuroscience and psychology and neuropsychology, an interesting new combination of a 7-year degree packed into 4 years. And they drove us 7 days a week and drove us crazy. But I'm very glad I did it, because without that, I wouldn't have this view of the mind, or this understanding that the mind is not the hard question of science. The mind's the most obvious question of science. And it launched me into my career of pursuing understanding mind. But I'll never forget one of our lecturers sort of throwing out the question there that, or the statement that your brain can't change, and and kind of questioning and saying, but maybe. And then I remember asking and saying, well, I'm sure it can change, because how can it not change if we're constantly growing and changing? And if that's the organ that is how we express ourselves. And I proceeded to start with my first research study with traumatic brain injured patients, because there was hardly any research on them, because of the philosophy of the day that if your brain is damaged, why do research? Why try and just teach them to compensate? And I challenged that. And a lot of my professors told me it was a ridiculous question. In fact, I have a TED talk on that, what the ridiculous question, which is, can the mind change the brain? So I started doing research, did some of the first mind-brain neuroplasticity research in my field in the late 80s, early 90s. And so my career continued working in the field, doing research, practicing clinically, looking for this elusive, or is it so elusive? What is mind? And how does it work? And what is the thought? And what's the difference between the mind and the brain? And what is memory? And where does thought, memory, emotions, mind, brain, where does it all fit in? And what level of control do we have? And how to apply that to people with traumatic injuries and Alzheimer's and dementias and learning problems and war trauma and sexual trauma and just life, just humans. And if you think of it, you wake up with your mind, you eat with your mind, you dress with your mind, you converse with your mind, you're listening now with your mind, you go to sleep with your mind. Your mind never stops. It's always going. You can go 3 weeks without food. You can go 3 days without water. You can go 3 minutes without oxygen, but you can't even go 3 seconds without using your mind. So if that's the case, shouldn't we know what it is and shouldn't we know how to manage it? So I worked on developing mind management, and initially it was very therapeutic and very much for people with extreme situations. And then I started simplifying and developing it to realizing, hey, I need this every day. My mind's a mess. And so it evolved into that. And watching neuroscience over the years, Dr. Perry, it's been insane. It went from this thing of the brain can't change to that the fact that and at that point, interestingly enough, mind and brain were seen as separate and a relational thing, but they were spoken about as separate things. The mind changed, but the brain didn't, which is interesting. Then it went to all this neuroscience about how the brain can change once we had fMRI technology and so on. Suddenly, then it was the brain can change itself. And then I always thought, how do people reach that conclusion? Because if I have a dead brain in my hand now, it's not going to do any changing. The changing only happens when the person's alive. So therefore, the energy force of being alive, which is mind, is the core driving force that is actually changing the brain. In which case, brain changing we know is neuroplasticity. Can you direct that change? And so the research continued over the years, and other researchers have done tremendous work, and neuroscience has advanced just to the point where we know so much more about the brain, but we've also become very neuroreductionistic, which I'm sure you are also concerned about, as I am, because it's kind of like, here I'm holding up a brain and a skull. It's like my brain made me do it. And, if I've got anything that happens, it's now my brain made me do it. It removes the humanity, it removes the context, it removes our story, and it hasn't worked. Because for 40 years, that's been the going philosophy. And we're sitting 40 years later with a tremendous problem. Don't even enter the pandemic, pre-pandemic, tremendous problem with how people are getting worse, not better when it comes to mental health. And it's not so much the mental health that's changed. We've always had mental health issues. People from the beginning of time, if you're human, you battle with your mind because life is not perfect. And the good and bad stuff happens to everyone every day in different levels of extremity over time. In any 1 5-year period, any human is going to go through some sort of severe or acute trauma. And so it's inevitable. You cannot not go through challenges on a day-by-day basis, as well as weekly, monthly, and obviously, as I said, different levels of extremeness on that continuum. So if that's the case, if we are experiencing life in this way, shouldn't we have some kind of understanding of how to manage this process? Because otherwise it's getting out of hand. You're thinking anyway. So why think in a mess? Why not clean up our mental mess? Why not take agency, which we actually do have, and develop it? And that's when I discovered that mind is actually a skill, and mind has different parts to it, and what it is, and it's a skill that we can. There's a skill element to mind, and that you can develop. So we should be teaching our kids from very young how to understand mind and how to develop their mind. This should be part of school curriculum. This should be part of growing up, because your mind is the source of everything. So we're neglecting this massive part of mind. And so that, what I've just said now, that's become very neglected over these years with neuroreductionism. It's all become about you are your brain. If you have depression, it's a chemical imbalance, which is a complete myth. It's not even science, but it's the going philosophy, determines people's labels and symptoms. And, we've come down to taking the mind stuff and linking it into how we see cancer or diabetes or autoimmune disorders, and that's the biomedical model. Works beautifully for the brain and the body, the physical nature. But the mind, which is separate but inseparable, it doesn't work well. Because if you have 2 people in front of you that are extremely depressed and cannot get their life together and they're just so unhappy, and you say you both have clinical depression, to validate the experience, actually, you've just invalidated the experience, because you've lumped 2 people in the same cookie cutter category without even hearing their story. Person 1 and person 2 have 2 completely different narratives. And therefore, their depression is not it's not a clinical illness like diabetes, which is often likened to. It is a response, a warning signal that there's something going on in your life. That's a symptom of an underlying cause. And we have to do the work of embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing in order to progress through. So despair or depression in that extent is an extreme state. But all of us experience it. You can experience it in an extreme way, or just little bouts of depression. If you're human, it's okay. Depression is a normal part of life, and if it's really bad, but that's the narrative that we used to have, and that I'm proposing we reintroduce, and not just me. There's a lot of us scientists that propose that, because we can't keep saying it's a disease and labeling it. It's like you want to validate someone's pain with someone's emotional pain and trauma with a disease label. Just yesterday, I was talking to an ex-Navy SEAL who has experienced the most phenomenal trauma, who's worked with his colleagues and his other Navy SEALs and so on. And just recently, one of them committed suicide. And it was a whole thing of, you've got PTSD, you've got a sickness. So here you've given your life, you've experienced the most extreme things that no human should have to experience. And obviously you're traumatized. It's an abnormal experience. It's an adverse experience. So you come back and you've got this trauma, and then you're told that you're mentally ill. You have a neuropsychiatric brain disease on top of the trauma that you've just gone through. You take away hope. No wonder they're committing suicide. I mean, he told me things like they will inject, basically it's probably haloperidol or something, one of the antipsychotics, into their spines to stop when they come, the war vets that are maybe overreacting, having a severe psychotic break or getting really worked up, to basically to numb them and to calm them down. That's not the solution. And I know that's extreme, and I know that there has been change, but the change has been, to answer your question in a very long way, it started off with brain not being able to change, but the division. Then it went to brain can change, but the mind got thrown out the door. And now we sit in the situation where we're trying to fix everything as a biological issue, and it's not working either. And in fact, just prior to the pandemic, we hit, and I talk about this in the book too, we hit a point where between 1996 and 2014, a huge population study was done, because certain group of scientists started noticing that, hey, something's going wrong here. We've got all this advance in medicine, all this advance in technology, all this amazing stuff, but the decades-long trend of people living longer is starting to reverse. So that means that people, we just accept it. People live longer because of the advances in medicine and technology, but actually it's not the case. But by 2014, the trend had actually been completely reversed. So we currently live in the most advanced era, with people dying younger than with the trend reversed. So people, instead of living longer, are actually dying younger, 8 to 25 years younger, from preventable lifestyle diseases. And then the pandemic hit. And so we've got that on top of that, fuel to the fire. But, when society breaks down to that point, that's your chance to rebuild. But that's another conversation. But the change has been frightening. So hopefully now we swing back to recognizing mind brain and start bringing the humanity back into dealing with people. And that's what I have tried to do with my work.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. What a wonderful
long answer.
I love it. Yeah, just keep going. Yeah. Well, that's a great point. That it just seems like, I don't know whether it's because we're much more aware of it now, or it's just exponentially growing, but there seems to be so much more of a mental health issue in the world in general. Is it more about awareness of it, or it's just hit a catalytic point?
I believe that, and it's such a brilliant question, and I've actually got a whole chapter on this in the book. Sorry, did you finish asking your question? Did you want to say? Okay. No. So it's so important to discuss this, because yes, we are in a very unique situation, as you all know. First time global humanities facing the same common enemy, which is a very interesting situation to be in. I've only been in this situation a few times in human history. But let's talk about the concept of mental health. Mental health is basically mind health. So, that goes to the question of, what is mind? If you're a human, you always use your mind, as I said, every 3 seconds. And mind is how we think and feel and choose. Notice I'm holding up 3 fingers, and I've said 3 things. We are always thinking. When we think, we always feel. And when we think and feel, we'll choose. Those two don't happen separately. They're not, I will think and then I'll feel, or sometimes I feel and then I don't think. You're always thinking. And because you're always thinking, you're always feeling. You can't think without feeling, and you can't think and feel without choosing. And that's mind. And you have your unique way that you're doing it, and I have my unique way, which builds each of our unique perceptions of the world. So essentially, that's what mind is. And we can talk about the sciencey side of it in a minute. But the psychological thing is mind is think, feel, choose. And you as a human are always thinking, feeling, and choosing, and building what you think, feel, and choose into thoughts. And so thoughts are real things that are made of memories. Like you have a tree. I've got a little tree here. It's a little green tree. Like a tree has roots and a tree trunk and branches. That's what a thought in the brain has too. So a tree and a thought have the same kind of structure. You'd well know that we talk about an arbor-like structure in the brain that the neurons and dendrites form. Well, basically that these would be your dendrites, but you've got your roots as well. So you've got your thoughts tree. And as you introduced me and started, you would have like literally sown a seed in inverted commas. And then as I started speaking and you and I started conversing, so people are hearing sound waves and seeing they're receiving electromagnetic light waves and sound waves. So they're hearing and seeing. And that hearing and seeing is processed through think, feel, choose, which is mind. And then it's that is then converted, that mind is then pushed, that mind energy, which is kind of around the brain and body, is then pushed through the brain. So you listen, you hear, you see, think, feel, choose, push that through the brain. Brain responds energetically, chemically, neurochemically, genetically, and the genetic part of it then creates proteins. So the result is that you make little proteins, amino acids, proteins, and those then group into branches that then grow, that are memories that then are part of the thought. So a memory is in the thought tree. So the tree is the whole thing, and the branches are the memories. So any one thought, and this thought today is about the mind-brain connection, mental health, whatever you want to call it, has got already lots of roots. Everything I'm saying is the roots, the source, and your interpretation is the tree trunk, and the branches and the branches growing out are how you see this information in terms of data, information, emotions, behaviors, and then how this then will manifest in your life in what you say and what you do. So the conversation you have post this or how it impacts your life would come from our conversation. You couldn't talk about this stuff unless you had received it first. So we receive it through our mind and build it into our brain, in this root origin story and interpretation. How we see it and view it and apply it is what we do with it. So that's happening all the time. That's what humans do. That's what you do. Every human who's ever existed and who will ever exist experiences life in this way. Now, sometimes it's good stuff. So we build, any one day we're going to have a series of good things and bad things. So there's the same kind of tree, but it's toxic and wiry, and the roots are the origin story, and the tree trunk's the perspective, and the branches are the emotions and behaviors of how you perceive this, and then that is how you'll act. So here you'll be this. Let's say that this is a great relational moment with let's say you're with a loved one, and you've got this relationship with them, and each connection with them is building more roots and stuff and whatever. So as you then get home and you're about to talk to them, this pops up and it's great. It's good stuff. But let's say that you have an argument and there's also this argumentative part of your relationship. There's this one, and you've had the same pattern of arguing over and over again, and then you never really deal with it. So it just stays there and it keeps coming up until you fix it. Okay, so in any one day you wake up and you have a great email, then a terrible email, then a great conversation, then a terrible conversation, and then a great Instagram post, then a bad Instagram post, and then good politics, a bad politics, and so the day goes on. Day to day, we're experiencing life. And then the bad stuff happens, the acute traumas, the death, the grief, the business, the whatever, all the horrible things that can happen to us in life, the trauma, the bullying, and so on and so on. So life is made up of the moment by moment, and then the big stuff that builds into our toxic habits and established traumas. That's been since the beginning of time. That's how mankind has basically operated, and it goes into our brain, also into our body, and in the DNA, and into the gravitational fields around the brain and body. Einstein's work done, a Nobel Prize winning scientist, a physicist a couple of years ago, won the Nobel Prize on gravitational fields. What we have around us is these electromagnetic gravitational fields, and that's mind, and it moves through the brain and body. When you're dead, that goes, this disintegrates. It's the life force. So your mind is this life force. So we've got all of this operating, and that's how man operates. That's the baseline. So here, this hasn't changed, except every period and every generation faces different things. So we happen to have been in the era of the advances in technology and medicine, major industrial age and technological age, and now we're in COVID, a very unique experience, and so on and so on. So we've got every generation is facing stuff. Second World War faced stuff, First World War, everything. So if you look at it like that, mankind has always battled with their mind, and that's mental health and mental illness. And I hate the word mental illness. So that's why I'd rather say mind, and using our mind, and some stuff is good, some stuff is bad. And when we have trauma, we're going to respond, or bad experiences, or we read some, the extreme stuff of rape to the horrible stuff of reading some irritating political viewpoint. Both of those are toxic experiences. Obviously, the rape is much more dramatic than the toxic experience. Both of those are toxic experiences of different degrees, and they affect how we function, because this forms in the brain. That we've got to really get this. As you experience stuff, it forms in your brain and becomes a physical structure. And now we know with the COVID virus, as an example, we know that our immune systems are fighting that. So anytime the brain or body gets any kind of damage or virus in it, we have the system in place, the immune system, to fight it. Well, the way that your brain and body fight a virus like COVID is exactly what it does with a toxic issue. This is real. It's made of proteins. It's not some ethereal thing. This is an experience that is experienced by yourself, converted through your mind into a physical structure in your brain and in your DNA and in the gravitational fields. It's there. There's a physicality to it, and because your brain is not wired for this. We call it being wired for love. Nobel Prize winning scientist said that. Optimism bias, whatever you want to call it, because of that, this creates damage. And so the immune system of the brain and the body, because we only recently discovered the immune system of the brain and that they're connected. We thought that the brain didn't actually have its own immune system. Now it does. And the immune system of the brain and body will respond to this toxic thought in the same way as though it's a virus. I mean, it will send out the same immune factors, the T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes and macrophages and the cytokine storms. And, to try and get rid of this, because that's what the immune system is doing. It's fighting. But if we don't deal with our stuff, we have got a continued inflammation. So that's the principle. When that happens, this creates signals. This is taking away from survival. Wired for love means survival. We're wired for survival. The brain, this shortens lifespan. This damages the brain to the point where you're going to have an autoimmune response. And if it stays there long enough, you've increased vulnerability to disease. So that is why the immune system is there. Anything that can shorten your survival or threaten your survival needs to be gotten rid of. That's the basic biological principle of brain and body and mind. So when anything invades, whether it's COVID or whether it's a toxic trauma that you haven't dealt with, it is affecting survival. And what we want to do is deal with that. We want to fix that. And since the beginning of time, that's happened. So how do we fix it? First of all, we've got to recognize it. What does our body do? When you have you work as a chiropractor, you're working with all this physical damage in the body and so on and you work through let me put it like this. When someone has done something to their body and they need an adjustment or something, there's a signal that they come to you, I'm in pain, okay? And you will say, where? And I mean, I'm being very simplistic, but you get the point. Mind is the same thing. That physical pain is a signal to you that something's wrong and you need to find the story. Where is the origin of this and the source of this pain? And it's probably would be multiple sources. So there's multiple interventions. But the fact is that you were warned. Depression, anxiety, terror, despair, extreme depression, psychotic breaks, all of these are not illnesses. All of these are warning signals telling you that something is going on. And so when we talk about mental health in the current age, that's not how it's seen. It's not seen as that. It's seen as a disease like cancer or diabetes. But if we shift the perspective and say, okay, all mankind, since the beginning of time, we all process this mind thing the way I've described, from mind into brain and body, and then we experience. And if it's toxic, the body tries to get rid of it. The mind tries to get rid of it. How? By sending you signals through this from the non-conscious, where all your memories in the thought trees, from a point in the womb to conception to now, all these little trees, you've got millions, trillions of trees in this forest of your mind and brain. All of those are informing your experience of life and adding to it. It's all the units that you built around you. they're designed to be green, healthy trees. So anything toxic, you want to get rid of it. So it sends out a smoke signal. Hey, fix me. This is a disruption. This is not survival. It's not my survival. So your instinct is to fix it. So that the depression, anxiety, etc., are wake-up calls, messengers. See them as helpful, not as something, oh gosh, that's bad. I'm clinically depressed. I must suppress it. Worst thing we can do. The West has really created a problem. Western philosophy of seeing those as unhelpful or bad and must get rid of them is one of the worst things we can do. The Eastern philosophy is see those despair, anxiety as helpful. My research, and I write about it in here, says if you embrace and gather awareness, if you see it as a helpful messenger, I know depression's awful and anxiety. I've had it myself. I experienced it often because we're human. And extreme states can be very frightening. Despair, terror, these are awful, but they are not. To control them, you need to be able to see them as messengers, not as something wrong with you, but as something happening to you. And when you see it like that, it shifts perspective. Then you can embrace them. And even in the midst of your tears and your despair, you, by acknowledging and owning them and giving yourself permission to experience them and telling yourself it's okay, this is a response. There's something going on. There's a reason. I'm not, there's not no reason. So can you see the shift? When you do that, your brain physiology, your brain and body physiology works for you instead of against you. 1,400 physiological responses, as you know, neurophysiological responses will work for you instead of against you. But if I say, oh, depression, anxiety, I'm going to decrease brain health, increase inflammation, increase cortisol rising up, decrease DHEA, hormones go mad, DNA goes mad, telomeres, and I showed this I've even got pictures in here. I've even got nice little colored images of the QEEGs I did on subjects, and I'll talk about that if there's time in a moment. But essentially, we will have this experience physically from our mental. So we need from our mind. So we need, and our mind's like going through our brain. So instead of seeing them as something bad, see them as something helpful. The minute you do, you shift your brain resilience, and then you're able to, okay, it's okay. I can feel sad. I don't have to feel guilty. Take the guilt, take the shame, make it work for you. Embrace it. Find out what it means. And then when you find out what it means, you own it. You shift the power balance, and then you can deconstruct and reconstruct. So it's embrace, process, reconceptualize. That's kind of the operating principle. And that's how mental health should be viewed, not as a scary view. The scary view is actually increased this level of, so that's what people are saying. It's getting worse and worse. Of course it's getting worse, because if you drug people, you damage the brain. If you don't deal with these toxic issues, they're volcanic in nature. They're not going anywhere except exploding, because the more you think about them, the more you don't deal with them, the more they grow. And so we can't just leave them there. Our survival has been threatened. So if you keep pushing down the fire, eventually it will explode. If you have a pussy wound on your hand, or if you have some damage in your body and you just slap a Band-Aid on, it's still there. Until you find the source and have the antibiotic to kill the bacteria that's caused the pussy wound, it won't go away. And that's what we're doing. We're just whacking on the Band-Aid and thinking a couple of sessions of this or a little bit of that. But we've got to go through the process of reconceptualizing, embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing. And this is hopeful. This means that it's okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to, male, female, whoever you are, adult, child. The sooner we level the playing fields and accept that and create an environment where it's okay, we will be much happier and safer and healthier as humans, and much more loving. Okay, that's a long answer.
Well, I got to tell you something, Doc, and I think a lot of people that are listening or watching might feel the same. That was very emotional for me personally, just to hear you say that. It's almost like a form of, like, it is okay to unload something, and like, I'm a little bit choked up, honestly, just like listening to that. It really is, because I kind of came to experiencing that on my own, pain and suffering, which is what led me to your work. But like, wow, just give me a second to catch up there.
No, that's beautiful. That's exactly what we need to have is this ability to feel free, that you can actually respond with emotion, that it's so healthy, because and the support and community and connection, we're here to support each other. This is what life is about. This is how we move forward as humanity, not fighting, not pushing things down and pretending they're not there, but getting it out and then progressing forward, not getting stuck in it, but get it out, because you can't fix what you're not aware of. And we know neuroscientifically as well that the minute you're aware, you actually weaken the bonds on the protein little bonds which are holding the vibrations, the quantum vibrations of the information. So when these bonds of these trees are weakened, it means I can change them. So you can change, and there is a way of doing it. You're designed to change. You're designed for survival. So I'm essentially in the Neurocycle, which is the system I've developed over these years in therapy and clinically, and all the science behind it. Nothing I teach hasn't got years of science behind it. I wanted to find a way of accessing, creating a system that my patients initially could use to deal with the trauma, to deal with the learning disability, to deal with the Alzheimer's symptoms and the autism symptoms and the traumatic brain injury changes in their life. I wanted to be able to give, and then just me day to day and my patients day to day, and humans, just my friends and kids coming to me and family saying, my mind's stuck. I keep people pleasing. I'm ruminating all the time. My mind is it's traumatizing me. I don't know how to live with my mind. I wanted to be able to give people the tools to be set free from that, and not to be scared of that, to say, okay, there will be periods where you're ruminating. Okay, so own it. I'm ruminating. I'm making this mess in my mind. I'm totally toxic. Okay, why? So it starts with accepting, embracing, giving yourself permission, and that's the whole 5-step process. And it can be applied in a moment by moment, on your own, in a relationship, for the big stuff like the traumas and the bullying and the war trauma and those toxic habits that we have, those little patterns that keep emerging in a relationship or in the way that you handle your business. And then they cripple one, they keep one stuck. It's that your mind's always with you. So all I'm doing is teaching people how to manage this mind that is always with you for the day-to-day and the big stuff. And that's why I'm so passionate about this, because it works. I mean, my research shows you can increase your control over managing these things by up to 81%. I mean, that's huge. No drug. I mean, 10% improvement and you'll feel amazing. And what that means is now, it doesn't mean that I'm totally clear of mental messes. Gosh, acute traumas happen. I get irritated. In my podcast, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, I'm totally honest about how I use this neurocycling. But you can have an argument, a stupid argument that is out of the blue because you're a little bit worked up. The difference now is that I know how to recognize the symptoms and I know what to do. I don't beat myself up anymore about, oh gosh, you did that, you terrible person, you terrible mother, you whatever, you look at a waste of time. How could you do that? Guilt, shame, condemnation. I don't. As soon as I start feeling that, I grab the guilt, the shame, the condemnation. It's energy. Energy is never lost. It's always transferred. So I think I'm not going to let guilt and shame get me stuck. I'm going to use that guilt and shame. I'm going to own it. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to gather it. I'm going to use that energy into fixing this. Why do I feel shame? Okay, well, you said that. Well, own it. It was terrible. Say sorry. It's a simple, instead of, oh gosh, and what, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It just shifts and transforms. You create a space of mental peace. It's a bit like you learn, and it gets better and better all the time. So to finish that thought, I now in my life at 57, have been doing this for so many years and refining it as a scientist from the way the system looks now to what it looked in 35 years ago. It's so different because I've constantly refined it, but the same basic concepts, but just refined. Now what I can find is that within a few minutes, I can recognize really fast when I've done something that's upset my husband or my kids, or that's going to upset my psyche for the day. Whereas in the past, I would kind of mellow in it. I would just get stuck in it. And one argument would affect my day, and then everything else was just horrible. I don't do that anymore. I've got much more efficient at, okay, I've done this, I own it, I'm catching it, over and done with. 5 minutes, the next hour I want to be like this. That's the difference. I'm seeing if there's a consistent pattern in my life. I'm recognizing that as probably some sort of trauma-based thing. So I do the work. I do 63-day. So you do the Neurocycle to fix up the long stuff, the toxic traumas and the toxic habits, the stuff that's very established. You've got to do the 5 steps of the Neurocycle every day for 21 days. But that doesn't mean you've built a habit. It doesn't take 21 days to build a habit. It takes around about 3 weeks to break down this toxic thought and to build the reconceptualized new thought that's got the old in the new, but the old is different now. It's like if you take a house, ugly old house, and you buy that to renovate, and you take all these photos and it's super ugly and terrible, mold and ugly, everything, you bash it down and build this beautiful new space, but you still remember how it was, but you're living in this beautiful space. So it's reconceptualized. It's now how you're seeing it in a different way. So it's looking at that situation of, I'm not going to constantly say if only and get stuck in the moment and not enjoy the moment, and if only I did this, if only I said that, if only. I used to live in such trauma doing that. Now it's reconceptualized. I've gone through the process. I've done the 63 days, the first 21 days of 5 steps a day. I managed to find out why I always said if only. And then I reconceptualize that to say, okay, I'm saying it because I feel a lack of control and I want a level of control, but I do have control. So therefore I'm going to do this. And I changed my perspective to say, okay, if only, instead of it being something negative, what's the lesson? So instead of it, oh no, I'm stuck, and then letting scenarios go through my head of what I cannot change. But if I did this, and tormenting myself with all these stories of what it could have, I now know, so if only, okay, what's the lesson? What did I learn not to do? So next time, if I'm in a similar situation, I don't want this and this and this and this. So I've got an action plan. I'm done. It's over. That's the difference. So I'm managing issues so much. And that's what my patients and people that have been using this for a period of time, that they can gain. It's that mental peace. And it's the ability to enjoy this, not to enjoy, to embrace the sadness and to embrace the despair, because there's a message. It's part of your character. It's part of your development. It's part of who you are. We've got to start supporting each other in that process and helping each other progress forward.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the awareness part, right? You can't change something to become aware of it. And then when you become aware of it, having the empowerment of what can I do to change it?
Exactly. Exactly. That's it. And having that, recognizing that we have this agency, that's been massive in the shift. People often ask me the question, well, what is the thing that shifts a person from battling with addiction, which is not a disease? It's basically just a pain response. It's a trauma response. There's something that's terrible that's happened, and people are trying to drown out the pain with some sort of obsession that they become addicted to. But addiction is a warning signal, not an illness. It's being able to actually see it in that view and shift your viewpoint to recognizing that it's okay. There's a reason behind this, and that gives you that sense of peace. Your question was, I went slightly off topic there. What was your question there? Sorry, you can maybe edit this.
Oh, no, it wasn't a question. I was just bringing that up about that combination of people having the awareness of this.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Tools to be able to do something with it, like
yes, the agency
steps that you mentioned.
Yes, the agency. That's true. Sorry, so I got a bit off topic there. So, I mean, not even off topic. The example to give the way an addict, for example, and I hate to say addict, but someone who's bad, you shouldn't say addict because it sounds like if you say someone who's battling with addiction, for example, is to give them the sense of agency. So when someone changes, the key, that was what I was saying, the key to someone shifting between I know I should do it to I'm actually going to do it, and is agency, is in autonomy. It's the ability to know, oh gosh, I don't have to live controlled by this. It's hard work, but there is a way of finding out why I feel the need to suppress my pain with this particular addiction, or there's a reason why I'm using depression. Addiction and depression and anxiety are warning signals of a coping mechanism, which is not sustainable, but it's what you needed to do in that moment to cope, but it's not sustainable. So when you look at it like that, you don't have to beat yourself up. You did the best you could in the moment. But now you've got to recognize that you don't have to get stuck there. You can change how the past plays out into your future. You don't have to live because that pattern's not sustainable. It now becomes negative and backfires. So the agency element of autonomy, and in the book I talk about what we found with our experimental subjects, because we had an experimental control group, was that there was a definite clear pathway to empowerment. And the first part of empowerment is autonomy, a sense of agency, a sense of, oh gosh, this is okay. It's not so bad. It's telling me something. It's not who I am. It's what I'm experiencing because of something I've actually experienced even deeper. It's a symptom of an underlying cause. That shifts from being completely hopeless to being in control, autonomy, agency. And then you can say, okay, now that I've got that's the major shift. Now I can look, okay, why? What are the warning signals? And I can go through the process of the 5 steps to actually look at this toxic thought and the toxic stress it's caused in my brain and my body, and actually then see the barriers that it's created in my life as opportunities. And that's the path to empowerment. So if people want to know, how do I shift from that despair, I can't get out of bed, I don't know what to do, it's to recognize the sense of agency. And that's something we haven't been taught. It's something you have to tell people, hey, you can do this. This is how the mind works. This is what the mind is. You've got this inner wisdom, this wired for love part of our mind, where we actually have this gut instinct that is survival, that is totally wise. We know what to do, but we're so blocked by hurry, sickness, and so caught up with wrong messages that we forget to tune into the depths of our inner wisdom. And that's what this neurocycling teaches you, to start tapping into that very quickly. And an example of that, which shifts you into agency or autonomy, independence, I can do this, is things like, just think of a time when someone came to you for advice and you spoke to them and you just gave them the most phenomenal advice that you would, like, you gave, like, you sort of, where did they come from? You felt good. You ended up giving yourself, those feelings, those aha moments, you help a patient and their life changes. It's just like you knew what to do. That's the inner wisdom. All of us have it. And we've got to learn how to tap into that more efficiently all the time. And neuroscience shows that on a conscious level, when we're conscious, our mind's got different levels. Conscious minds when we're awake, we can actually self-regulate and mind manage in this way every 10 seconds. And I'm not asking you to watch your watch or your time on your phone, but it's the concept. You can actually self-regulate continuously, because every 10 seconds means 6 times a minute I can actually observe how I'm thinking, feeling, and choosing. How do I do that? Well, how are you speaking? What is your body language? What's your intonation? What's your facial expression? What is the impact of your words and your body movements on the person you're talking to? How well are you doing your work? What's your feedback? It's getting into that mindset. How am I responding in this moment? I read this article. It's making me mad. Observe the mad. Is this good for you? Is it going to help you? Is it going to be beneficial to the rest of the day? Is it going to permeate now how you see the rest? Well, if it's bad, if it's not, so the neurocycle would help you catch that. It trains you to be this observer of yourself, to get into what I call the multiple perspective advantage and stand back and observe your own thinking, feeling, choosing, mind in action.
So it's like, that's beautiful. It's like a being here now with
yes.
now and not being lost in the past or the what ifs of the future, but like wherever you are, there you are, right? But embracing that. And I've had to work for that, because it's not easy. It takes practice, but it's really, really powerful when that happens. And I wanted to share a quick story with you, but because so many things you've said have resonated with me. First of all, your props are phenomenal, because you've got a beautiful, luscious plant tree there that's green, and then you have another one that is, I think it's like metal, right?
Wiry. It's all wire.
Wiry, like one of those toxic trees, that really stands out. And something, when you did that viral comparison, that really hit home, because your immune system of your body will react when you get an invader that comes on in. And the way you can frame that to say, well, your thoughts are extremely toxic, and they're sort of like a virus, a viral thought. And then your immune system will react the same way. And
it's powerful.
I experienced that for myself when about 5 years ago, I got an autoimmune disorder, and I was pretty sick for a while. I've become much more observant of how my body reacted to stressors. And then I realized once, where you've given us some example here, I was actually reading something and I started to get upset. And when I was getting upset, my body started to have those autoimmune signals start to fire up out of nowhere. And I was just like, there's the switch.
There's the switch.
I could feel it, because I was
in your body, because you were aware of it. It's so vital what you said there. So thank you for sharing that example, because that's so vital, that awareness component. And you said, I want to just emphasize the mindfulness. We often think of mindfulness, you've just got to focus on the now, and you said that, and it's not incorrect, but our mind actually time travels all day long. So whenever we can never really eliminate we never do eliminate the past and the future, because it's always informing the now. The difference is that you be observing it. You're observing. So the now moment is at this particular moment, I'm going to observe what I'm thinking, feeling, and choosing, but that will automatically, your mind will time travel into the past and into the future, because the implications of now are coming from, oh, okay, I think like this because of the past, and what's the impact in the future. So we always think in that dimension, so it's just, I just wanted to point that out, that it's actually, this stand back and observe yourself thinking draws on we time travel. We're always time traveling, but you've got to actually discipline yourself to get into that mode where you are observing your thinking. That's so critical. It's key to moving forward with your mind, because then you can feel mind. You can actually experience mind in 3D, 5D.
That's actually so valuable for me. Thank you for that. Right. I mean, I love the word observation as well. So you helped me become more aware of my observation skills. So that's great. Thank you.
Of course. I mean, you know what you're doing. People don't always think about the time travel aspect, and it's fascinating because the way you look at yourself now is based on what you have in existing memories. So if you're looking at yourself in a particular moment and it's shame, that shame is not for survival. We've got to think we are survival. All about our whole brain and body and mind are designed for survival. So a COVID virus threatens survival. A toxic trauma threatens survival because of the damage it's physically doing. So our body's trying to eliminate, as I said earlier on, the pus is a sign of us trying to eliminate the bacteria because it threatens our survival. So we've got to observe what's threatening my survival. That's what mind management is. So it's the state of, so you've got to get in that observing, stand back and observe your own thinking. I call it the multiple perspective advantage. We as humans have that inbuilt into us. We just have to develop it.
Oh, I love the words too. Advantage. That's great. Is it the reframe on that? Because it's so true. Because your past will influence how you're observing something now, right? And
exactly.
You may be observing something, and how you're observing it is because of what you might expect to come after you've observed it, right? I mean,
exactly.
It's like a matrix, right there.
It is. In fact, it's totally quantum. It's your present, past, and future blend when you're in that non-conscious part of your mind, which is the biggest part of your mind, which operates 24/7. It's the dynamic, intelligent present, past, and future, because it's everything about you that you've experienced, and then your conscious mind can only handle a few things at a time. So it's coming up from the non-conscious to the conscious.
What do you think? I mean, because that is such a stressful, threatening thing for a human to not have control or feel like they don't have control.
Exactly. Very stressful and very scary, but we can have control, and that's the beauty of it. But it's a skill that you develop. Like we go to the gym and you develop, your muscles, and you train to become a pro athlete and so on. You need to do that with your mind. As we need to start this with our children. We need to teach our kids, that anxiety is a signal in the mind. When your little friend steals your toy and you feel sad, that sad is your mind, and you sad because of, so that you don't become sadness. I was asked a question the other day when I did a live. Someone said, how do we teach our children not to be professors of depression? And I thought, what an interesting question. How do we teach our children not to be professors of depression? Because our kids growing up now have been exposed to depression as an illness. It's basically hopeless. I feel depressed. There's no hope. This is a brain disease, because that's the messaging that they've had. Right. So we need to tell them, no, that depression's okay. It's okay. There's meaning in it. Let's find the meaning, as opposed to, oh, you're sick and you can't control this. That's what our younger generation are growing up with, which is crazy. Like when I was at school, when you were at school, we were not told that depression was an illness. It was basically that you can have emotions and sadness and it's okay. And now kids are getting lectures about depression is a clinical, if you feel this, these are the symptoms, come see your doctor with medication. This is the messaging. And so what do you expect? They become professors of that. What are they supposed to do? They don't have the context of adulthood to know, okay, in the past I felt like this and I got through it. A child of 10 doesn't even know what to do with that. This is where we're seeing COVID, for example, that the older generation are isolated and suffering from isolation because they don't have the technological expertise. The younger generation have the technological expertise, so they're getting more, they're dealing with the isolation slightly better. But the older generation are dealing with the trauma of COVID so much better because they have context. They have a whole history of life where I've been through bad things and I've got through them. So can you imagine if we bring the two together properly and have conversations, let the young help the old with the isolation technological side, and the older generation say, hey, this is we'll get through this. This too shall pass, that kind of thing. And if we can, that's all mind. Everything I've just said is mind. It's all mind. This whole conversation is mind. It's how are we managing it? And that's the process that the neurocycle is. And the neurocycle, someone asked me a question, what happens if someone's in an extreme state of depression or having psychotic breaks? Once again, that's not an illness. That's just an expression. It's a symptom. It's a warning signal that something's going on that's so bad that maybe has been suppressed for so long. These are volcanic in nature. Eventually, they're going to explode. And that can happen, that you have this disassociation. Eventually, you can get to a point where very, very often people, they say, show schizophrenic tendencies in the 15 to 22-year-old. That's when it shows up. And that's kind of, we told it's genetic, and schizophrenia shows up between the ages of 15 and 22, more or less. Well, let me tell you why it shows up. It's not genetic, first of all. That research is not confirmed at all. There's changes in your genes, of course, because your mind moves through your brain. But the age group, it's so interesting, 15 to 22, where the symptoms show up, because very often it's a childhood trauma. So you don't know how to express yourself when you're 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 9 or 10, when you've had childhood trauma or sexual trauma. You're still very controlled by the adults who said, don't say anything. But then you get to 15, 16, 17, autonomy's set in. You have your own rhetoric. You can start questioning things. That's part of your development. So now you're actually thinking, hey, I feel shame. This is confusing. This goes against survival. You can't maybe verbalize it, but you're questioning. So therefore, the extreme trauma start coming up, flashbacks, etc., and that can cause the psychotic breaks, which are then labeled as, oh, that's when schizophrenia is manifesting. These things were suppressed for 15 or 16 or whatever amount of years. They will explode. They don't stay suppressed forever. They will explode in the mind and the body. So very often we'll see people manifesting with those kind of symptoms, with also severe GI symptoms or heart cardiovascular or like strange illnesses in people that have had, and when you really like severe, and you look back and you see, okay, there's trauma, there's stuff that hasn't been dealt with. So you have to work on both levels.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there, because I see that in my world, where so many people have chronic pain, and that they're not pain to anything because they have the physical pain, but
yeah,
they haven't looked at as an emotional component or trauma or shock.
And it's huge. Yeah.
And it depends on what type of medicine you're in, because sometimes people are still not ready to embrace that. But also, when you reach that age group, right, the 15 to 22 range, let's say that's starting to come out. I mean, most people are met with medications or talk therapy, but no other type. How does that play?
Well, it just makes the medications are not going to help. I mean, and they're not even medications. They're classified as drugs, psychotropics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety. They're misnamed as well. They're not anti-anything. They're basically different types of anesthetics or the stimulants like Adderall, which is the opposite category. But they are actually creating changes in the brain that aren't very good. And every patient getting these drugs should actually go through a 16-page informed consent document, which very few doctors are doing. And if they did read through all of those, it would tell you about what these actually are and what the side effects are. And then people would make much more of an informed consent before they just whacked on. But they're going to the doctor, they're saying, I'm feeling depressed. They get a prescription before they've even I train physicians. Physicians are not trained in mind. What they know about antidepressants is from the drug reps and from the small course that they did at university. And they trained to look at symptoms and give medication. That's their training. So you come with a symptom, they've been trained, that symptom is a disease, give a medication. So 95% of these drugs are being given by your primary care physician who doesn't actually have sufficient training unless they've decided to study further in the area of mind. So you shouldn't be going to them, you should be going to the counselor and the therapist and the psychologist and so on, but a lot of them are also going in that drug model. So yeah, your child comes out starts showing these symptoms, and the drugs are going to exacerbate, and very soon they'll be on polypharmacy. So it's what to do about the drugs. I mean, just as a side note, I would recommend it's every person's own choice. Find out, get information, get the informed consent, request that 16-page whatever document. There's a shortened version to go online, go to the NICE guidelines. These are all places you can find and what it really does in your body. And then if you make the decision to come off, taper, don't just stop, because the withdrawal symptoms are your brain adapting to the drug going out of your system, and it's made major changes. So your brain's got to adapt back, and that can lead to all the suicidal ideation and all the terrible, physical illnesses and so on. So tapering is critical under medical care. So I just wanted to make that side note. Get informed, get the knowledge, and then do it under medical care and taper. I cannot stress that enough. So that's on the drug side. But yeah, you're going to make it worse. Talk therapy, if it's a good therapist and who knows how to actually deal with trauma and how to take the person through the journey of understanding the warning signals to the root cause, then that's fantastic. So my system I've developed doesn't replace therapy, it enhances therapy. It is, the Neurocycle is you living with your mind 24/7. You wake up with your mind, you go to bed with your mind. It never stops. So therapy, you go to once or twice a week, counseling, whatever. What do you do with yourself the rest of that day and the rest of that week? You have to know how to. So the Neurocycle is, how do you live with yourself? And how do you get yourself prepared that you get the most out of therapy? So it enhances therapy. A lot of therapists are actually getting their patients onto the Neurocycle, because I have an app as well that goes with the book, and getting them neurocycling. And we're setting up a Neurocycle lab and everything to help whoever, because if you're human, you need to know how to manage your mind. And then there's the therapeutic applications that take it to the sort of deeper level when you're dealing with, the more severe, extreme, ever continuum on the sort of -5, 6 to 10 kind of thing. So that's kind of where we're at.
I love it. Those are great advice. And I think they should all get your book and all of your other books and follow everything that you do. I love your Instagram channel as well.
Thank you.
You have so many really wonderful posts on there about trauma or emotion. And it's such an empowering channel, which I love. And the one thing that comes across here, Doc, is your love and energy for what you do. I mean, it just pulls in, which I love. And I know that I've had my director of operations, Louisa, if you're still there, Louisa, how is your brain holding up with all this?
Hi again.
Can we just keep her on for another 3 hours, 3 days? Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I just want to,
you have a question?
I just want to thank you for what you said a little earlier about, it almost felt like you were giving us, all the listeners, permission to feel some of these negative feelings, right? Like you mentioned earlier, sadness, depression,
anxiety,
despair, right? Like you mentioned, so often when we have those feelings, it's like we're not allowed to feel that, or it's really, really bad if you feel all those things. And really what you said is that when you feel that, it's like something's wrong with you. There must be something wrong with you. And that negative connotation, and just how you, it once again, gave us permission to know it's okay to feel those things. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It's human.
Yes.
It's like the basic organic humanness, right?
Yes, exactly.
And just changing the narrative, changing the words we're using, the choice, right? That you said,
yeah,
the choice. So please, thank you so much for that. Oh my God, you're awesome.
Well, thank you. That's so kind of you. And thank you for saying that so beautifully. And that is what I'm trying to say. And thank you for reflecting that back. I really appreciate that. And it's true. I just want people to feel free to be, those negative emotions actually aren't negative. They're messages with energy, and you can grab that energy and you can make it work for you and find the message, and then be okay with feeling them, because sometimes we need to feel them. It's the depth of our humanity. It's actually quite beautiful to be able to feel those and then be able to transform them, and to have the autonomy to do that, the agency to be able to do that.
Right. It's almost like, how they always say, you can't have rainbows without the rain, right?
Exactly.
You can't have all these beautiful feelings and all these beautiful moments without having experienced the hardships a little bit.
Exactly. It shapes you and gives you that depth of character and just the appreciation for being human. And we've become a little bit avatar-like in this technological age. And we're paying the price. We're paying a terrible price. I mean, people dying 15 to 28 to 25 years younger in the prime of their life, because the age group that's been most hit is the 24 to 65-year-olds. So people are dropping dead at the beginning of their careers and at the peak of their careers, dropping dead. And that is 8 to 25 years younger, and that's preventable. And if we get our minds right, we can prevent this.
Love it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for your great comments there.
Yeah, it's really going to be fascinating to see where, neuroscience goes even in the next 10 years and the work that you're doing. Thank you, first of all, for everything that you do and sharing it with the world. It certainly makes a difference for a lot of people. It made one for myself and for Louisa. And your book, if you can hold it up one more time.
Absolutely.
See it. And
Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess.
Yeah, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. What a great title on that. And then tell people where they can get it when it's out and following you.
Absolutely. It's released March 2nd and it's coming. You can, wherever books are sold, you can get it. And you can go to cleaningupyourmentalmess.com and that'll take you to all the sources. Or my webpage is drleaf.com, and my Instagram handle and all social media handles are Dr. Caroline Leaf. And obviously from Instagram, you can access the new book. And I have a podcast called Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. So it's very appropriate, same title as the book. So people can learn a lot there as well. So.
I love it. It's a great title. And listen, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, Doc. Thank you very much for your time. It was really wonderful episode. And
thank you.
Like I said before, very emotional in a really, really wonderful way. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your compassion and your kindness and your lovely questions and just your enthusiasm and for getting this message I'm trying to get through. I appreciate that so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks, Doc.
Thank you. Thanks, Doc.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Louisa. Perfect.
Great. Excellent. Man, what a fantastic episode. Holy cow.